First of all, I want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you all today. Can you guys hear me in the back over there?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, great. So I don't have to really shout. I know I'm really small, so I'm trying my best to project as much as I can. So as Ed was talking, I'm here just to really talk about the inner critic. I know that, as Ed had said, I've been here training for the last 10 years. Geez, that's a long time. But ultimately, I've had to deal with this inner critic myself. And so I wanted to kind of give you just some tools at the end of this talk to be able to take home with you, whether it's in the athletic field, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, okay? So without further ado, I'm just going to be talking a little bit about this inner critic trap, okay? And I'm going to have you turn your enemy into your biggest cheerleader, okay? So, no, there we go. All right. So just a brief intro. Ed did a really good job in introducing me already. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm working in private practice here in Hong Kong for the last 8 years. I work with teenagers ranging from the age of 14 to adulthood. Range of presentations that I get to see are depression, anxiety, trauma, adjustment issues, grief, and personality issues, so rigid thinking, rigid ways of behaving in the world. Now, Ed did mention that I've been here for the last 10 years. I have been training here, and I was in the Perform group, and I've now moved over to the Live group because essentially, knowing my why, I figured that I just needed to get some movement in, stress management, big things, right? Now, one of the big things that maybe some of you know about me, because I see some familiar faces here, and also the coaches, they know this about me too, is that I don't like doing cardio. That's the big thing about me. I don't know about any of you, but when it comes to cardio, I'm just not, that's not me. Not to say that I'm a pro at weightlifting or anything, I just feel a lot more proficient, a lot more efficient there. And so when it comes to cardio, that's something I've shied away from, I would say for the last 9 years of training. And it's only really been in the last year that whether it's personal issues, personal family issues that have come up, I've realized that cardio is something I can't really run away from. So I made a pact, or I made a goal last year to really just kind of hone in on my number one thing, which is running, of course. I don't really like to run. Ed, you know this about me. I made this pact, and I use the 5 different tools that at the end of this talk I'm going to talk to you about and teach you. And I will tell you the results of that at the end. Okay? Now, so the key points, I don't know if you can see all of that, yeah? But it's all good. I'll just read it out, okay? The key points of this talk really is that I want you to know that mental health is really important. It's not just physical health. And I think the world is starting to realize that, but I think a lot of people still think physical health is super important, and we only talk about physical health, okay? But mental health is going to be important. I also want to identify to you that mental health does affect your physical health and your physical performance, all right? Whether it's in the gym or outside. Of course, talking about the evolution of this inner critic, where did we get it from, right? And what's the use of it? And finally, the 5 different exercises to counter this inner critic. Okay, so that's basically what I'm hoping to give you today, all right? So let's talk about the definition of health, all right? According to the World Health Organization, health is the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, all right? So in other words, what does that mean? It really means it's not really about healthy or not healthy. There's a spectrum of health, and it all encompasses something from physical health as well as mental health, as well as social well-being. So you can have different facets of your life that can be doing well and are healthy, but maybe some things are not, and some things can be affecting each other. Now, for the sake of this talk, and because of time constraints, of course, I could geek out on this the whole entire day. But in terms of time constraints, I'm really going to really talk about the physical as well as the mental health, all right? Just for the sake of this talk. So what I'm going to say, is that physical health and mental health, they kind of go hand in hand, all right? They're really important. And some people might actually say, well, no, it doesn't make any sense. I know that there are some people out there who would argue this. And I would actually give you two really good examples. One is Simone Biles, who in 2020, she pulled out of the US gymnastics team just because she had the twisties. I think most of you know what had happened there. It was a mental block, right? So a mental block stopped her from competing on an international playing field. The other is Naomi Osaka. She pulled out of the French Open, I think in 2021, because of depression as well as social anxiety. So these mental health issues can really affect your competitive edge and performance. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to talk about this today as to what happens, right? So, next part. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about this inner critic and how this inner critic came about. Again, for the sake of time and simplicity, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so our nervous system, we all have a nervous system. It's trying to figure out what is a threat, what isn't a threat. Okay, so when it comes to the autonomic nervous system, it's comprised of the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. You guys have heard these terms before, I'm assuming, for some of you, maybe, okay? So the sympathetic nervous system is associated with your fight or flight response. The parasympathetic is noted for your rest and digest. So what you guys are doing right now, resting and digesting, you're in your parasympathetic nervous systems, and I like that. I'm in my sympathetic nervous system at this point. I'm trying to educate you all right? And so my heart rate is going up a little bit, yeah? And because it's in the autonomic nervous system, it's basically where your heart rate, your blood pressure, all of the stuff that you don't have to consciously think about, it's just doing it, right? It's not like you're saying, okay, beat now, heartbeat now, right? Or digest my food. You don't need to actually think about all of that, right? So the inner critic, where does it reside? It resides in the sympathetic nervous system, so your fight or flight response, yeah? And basically, it's passed on from generation to generation because ultimately, it's an act of survival. So if I gave you the example of a saber-toothed tiger, right? Saber-toothed tiger, they want to come, they're coming after you. You're probably not going to invite them for tea. You're probably going to say, I need to either kill you or I need to run away. Now, that's your sympathetic nervous system. And your brain is on autopilot just saying, okay, what can I do to make sure I get out of this state, right? The state of survival. Again, passed on from generation to generation. If you don't survive that, your genes are probably not going to manifest itself and it's not going to pass on to the next generation. Fair? All right. So, what is the inner critic? Okay, as I said, passed on from generation to generation. It is the internalized voice of a critical adult in your life, okay? Now, I don't mean to say that this is going to be your parents. It could be anybody in your life. But the reason for that is because, well, you need to survive. So if you were, my parents were always like, Kylie, don't touch the stove. Do not touch the stove. It's on. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. If I did, I would learn, right? But it's that critical voice that allows me to bypass that, hopefully, so that I don't have to learn through experience, right? Now, if I break that down, that inner critic down into the two different types of critical voices, there's a demanding inner critic as well as a punitive inner critic. Now, the demanding inner critic is probably going to sound a little bit like this. You should do this. You should do more of this. You could do more of this. You must do this more later, right? It's the could've, should've, would've's of inner critics, okay? Punitive, on the other hand, is more of the label-y type of inner critics. So what's a label? Kylie, you are a fill in the blank. You are incompetent. You are stupid. You are weak. You are slow, right? You guys resonate with that? Do you guys recognize that in your mind? Okay, that's good. Excellent. Now, before I go on, there are pros and cons to this inner critic. You probably will think, well, how can there be a pro to something that's so punitive? Actually, there is. So in terms of the pros, well, as I said, it's part of that survival mechanism. So we kind of need to survive, right? There's a survival component to it. There's a motivational component to it to see how you can do better, right? Now, are there cons to this? Absolutely. And one of the biggest cons is that we listen to it. We listen to it 100% of the time, okay? Now, there has been some research done. Come on, move to the next slide. Oh no, no. Okay, sorry. There has been some research done, okay? There was a researcher in Stanford who basically did a whole bunch of studies on thoughts. And does anybody here want to take a guess as to how many thoughts we have in a day? How many? 5,000 thoughts? Anybody else? 2? 2 thoughts. 2 thoughts a day. All right. Well, actually, so in effect, we actually have a whopping 60,000 thoughts in a day. So for people who live in big cosmopolitan areas such as Hong Kong, New York, Singapore, all these places, we have about 60,000 thoughts in a day, all right? Came back and he said, you know what? I want to understand how many of these thoughts are repetitive, or are they all individual, like fantastic, innovative thoughts? Anybody want to take a guess there as to how many of them are repetitive a day as a percentage? Good one. Oh, very good question. Oh, take a guess for both. 10,000 repetitive thoughts, right? Okay. Any 50%? About 50%? What? 75? Ooh, you're getting close. 80% of those thoughts are repetitive. 80%. Well done. Well done. Okay. Now, lastly, there was another study that came out and said, okay, let me take all this data and let me determine whether it's positive thoughts, positive repetitive thoughts, or negative repetitive thoughts. What do you think? Negative? What's the percentage? What do you think? 90. Did I say 90? Jackpot. 90% are repetitive and negative thoughts. So that adds up to be about, in my math anyways, it's about 43,000 thoughts out of your 60,000 thoughts that are negative and repetitive thoughts. Ultimately, your inner critic is going hyperdrive every day, all day, and it's just a matter of us figuring out and listening to it. And sometimes it's on autopilot. We're just listening to it. It's like, you know that elevator music? It's background noise? Yeah, that's basically what it is. Okay? So this is the thing, right? How do we tame our inner critic? Because at the end of the day, as I said, there is a survival mechanism here, but do we really need to listen to it? How do we tame it? How do we calm it down, right? So the next couple of slides, all right, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about how I utilize this in my year of training for running, okay? And I hope this then inspires you, hopefully, in whatever that you are trying to work on, maybe in this athlete's camp or when you are out there training, okay? Or even in your world, right? In your work life, in your family life. So the question I have to ask, or I'll ask all of you, is what is your narrative? What is your storyline? Okay, what do you tell yourself? Notice and observe the narrative on how you describe yourself. Is it negative? Is it positive? Are you labeling yourself? Right? How did you come up with this conclusion? And did someone else say this about you and you just adopted it, even though, and never questioned it? Right? So my narrative, going back to the running bit, yeah, the narrative that I had about myself is I'm slow. It's not my forte. I feel like I'm dying half the time. And when I'm always last in class, so why bother? Why should I, right? I'm always going to be the slowest one. That was my narrative. Fair? So think about, again, I want you to take this opportunity now to think about something that you're trying to work on and see whether you can kind of identify this, all right? So the next part is what I would say is radical acceptance, another skill. So what is radical acceptance? It's the practice of consciously acknowledging and honoring difficult situations and emotions. Okay? Now, why would we do this? It's basically to accept things as they are instead of ignoring, avoiding, or engaging in wishful thinking, which can prevent us from moving past a difficult experience. Okay? So in my case, again, running, I said all those things about myself, and I said, you know what, yeah, that's true. All of it, to a certain extent, is true. I am going to be the last one. Running is not my forte. It's not a strength of mine. I know that, right? I do prefer weight training compared to running. However, I'll accept where I am because, to be fair, I haven't really worked on it. I haven't put in the effort to work on it. So how can I actually get better, right? So I just accepted where I was. Now, third skill to have, compassion, right? So this inner critic is going at full force, 100 miles an hour. Compassion is going to be your savior. It's going to be something that you can counter your inner critic with. And so compassion is defined as the desire to take action to help the other person. This other person is not really the other person, it's actually you. You're going to have to be compassionate to yourself. And it's a practice that we can do for ourselves, okay? You guys have heard that we are our worst critics, right? Yeah? Yeah? So who do you think is the critic? It's your inner critic that's talking here, okay? So we do have to be a lot more compassionate to self. Now, I put down here, I don't know if you guys can see it, but it is not giving yourself an excuse or an out for not being able to get what you truly desire. Instead, it's the ability to soothe and motivate yourself for the future. Okay? So, again, kind of going back on my running scheme here, right? I accepted that this is where I was, and it's okay for me to be where I am right now. Even if it is at the bottom of the rung, even if I am the slowest, it's okay. It's absolutely fine because I have to start somewhere. Okay? Now, the next part, visualization. I think this is something that many of you have heard of, and it's basically creating and using imagination to create detailed mental images with a specific purpose to overcome adversity and the inner critic. Okay, so essentially it's creating an image in your mind of how the workout is going to go and how you are going to bypass adversity or how you're going to deal with adversity, okay? What I would advise you to do is actually it would be to include as many senses as you can. So that would include your sights, sounds, smell, touch, taste, all of that, okay, within that image. So what I imagine when I'm going out for a run nowadays is basically, okay, here we go. What I'm going to do, I'm imagining myself walking out of the apartment, getting into a little bit of a rhythm of jogging, feeling 30 seconds into it that I know that my heart is going to go crazy. There's going to be some lactic burn already, even though it's just a jog, but that's okay. I know I can put one foot in front of the other and I can get over this. Okay? So that's visualization. And if there's any other adversity, well, it's all right. I can do it. I've had my previous experience. My previous experience tells me I am not going to die and pass out, which is great. Okay? But essentially, I can imagine this and I can just keep going. Put one foot in front of the other. Now, last but not least, it's finding a good community, finding like-minded individuals who share similar values and are willing to lift you up and motivate you. As I said, we are our greatest critic. Having like-minded individuals around you can help you. It's amazing how we can actually be such critical elements to ourselves, but when it comes to our peers, when they're down, yeah, there's some banter that goes around here and there, but for the most part, we lift each other up. We motivate each other. And it's much easier to deal those enthusiastic lifts, if you will, right, and motivations to other people. But for ourselves, we get really critical. And we actually shouldn't have to be that critical to ourselves. okay? So in essence, when it comes back to my running, I basically I surrounded myself with a whole bunch of really great like-minded individuals in this gym. And with the encouragement and, with constant training, consistency, I was able to complete my High Rocks relay. And I'm actually averaging now about 6 to 12 kilometer runs every week, which from somebody who didn't like cardio, yeah, I know, geez, right? But when it comes to not running at all to now where I am, I hate to say this, Coach, but I really am starting to like running. Absolutely hate, But I really hope that these skills can help you. I know that this is short. I hope it's sweet and short, but I hope this really helps you kind of question your thought process and be able to utilize this in the gym, in your next workout, but also in your interpersonal lives as well as your work life. So thank you very much for all of your attention.